You've been home alone for one rainy weekend. You have your phone, a refrigerator full of food, 3 streaming subscriptions you pay for, and a 4th you've been stealing from your ex since 2023. And they know, they just let you keep it out of pity. You have a front door that opens whenever you want. And by Sunday night, you're pacing the kitchen, arguing with strangers on the internet about an election in a country you could not find on a map with both hands. And you're losing. To a bot. Now, remove all of that. Remove the phone, remove the shows, remove the strangers, remove the window, remove the door handle on your side of the door. Shrink the room until you can touch both walls at the same time, and take away every voice, every face, every book, every screen. The light stays on, or it doesn't. That decision belongs to someone else now. And instead of a weekend, make it a year. Make it 10. Make it, in at least one documented American case, 43 years. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you. Some of the people who lived in that room walked out with their minds intact, organized, sharp, unbroken. No therapist, no support group, no meditation app charging $79 a year to teach them something their lungs were already doing for free. $79 to breathe. Breathing was the last free thing we had, and somebody put it behind a paywall. How? That is not a rhetorical question. The people who solved it left instructions. This is the question nobody thinks to ask about prison, because we're usually too busy asking about the dramatic stuff, the riots, the escapes, the gangs, the things documentaries put in the thumbnail. But solitary confinement is unglamorous and relentless, and it was arguably more dangerous to the people inside than almost anything with fists. It does not attack the body. It attacks the thing running the body. It dissolves time first, then memory, then the sense that there is a you at all. The United Nations literally drew a line on a calendar and wrote the word torture on the far side of it. And yet, across 2 centuries of this practice, a minority did not dissolve. They came out with law degrees they gave themselves, books composed in their heads, chess careers conducted behind their own closed eyes. Because here is the thing most people have never been told. The survivors of solitary confinement were not passively enduring an empty room. They were running a system. A structured, repeatable, teachable system, invented independently by people who never met, in cells decades and continents apart, and the versions are so similar that researchers keep arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. There is a correct way to survive an empty room, and almost nobody on the outside knows what it is. So how did prisoners survive solitary confinement? The answer takes us through a 19th century Philadelphia experiment so disturbing it horrified the author of Oliver Twist. An abacus built out of stale bread, a chess grandmaster defeated by a man who had spent 400 days alone in a punishment cell, and a secret alphabet tapped through stone walls by men who never once saw each other's faces. Let's go through exactly how it worked. First, you have to understand what isolation actually does to a human brain, because the mechanism is the whole story, and it is considerably stranger than just loneliness. Your brain is a prediction machine. Its entire job is to take in a continuous stream of input, faces, voices, weather, the small chaos of other people, and build a running model of the world from it. It is, in fairness, the original recommendation algorithm. Except this one runs offline, costs nothing a month, and has never once interrupted your grief to show you a man in Dubai renting a Lamborghini. Cut the input stream, and the machine does not power down. It keeps running at full speed with nothing to process. Then it begins manufacturing its own content. In the early 1950s, psychologist Donald Hebb at McGill University paid students more than double a normal wage to do absolutely nothing. Lie on a bed in a quiet cubicle wearing goggles, gloves, and padding that muffled sight, sound, and touch. That was the entire job. Getting paid to lie down. Understand what happened here. Science invented passive income in 1953, and it broke every single test subject in 3 days. There is a man on the internet right now who will sell you a course on that exact lifestyle, filmed on a beach he does not own. The students expected easy money and a long nap. Most of them broke within 2 or 3 days. They lost the ability to think in a straight line, failed arithmetic they could do on the way in, and began to hallucinate. Dots, patterns, and eventually full scenes, squirrels marching with sacks over their shoulders. Healthy young adults, safe, fed, and paid. Their minds dismantling themselves within 72 hours. Hold on to that number because modern international law drew its own line at 15 days. Beyond 15 consecutive days, the United Nations Mandela Rules classify solitary as prolonged, prohibited, and capable of causing permanent psychological damage. The people in this video did 15 years. Some did 40. which means every one of them had to solve alone, with no training, a problem that broke paid volunteers in a weekend. To understand what they were up against, you need to see where the room came from. Because solitary confinement was not an accident of overcrowding, and it was not invented by cruel guards. It was designed, on purpose, by idealists. In 1829, on a hill outside Philadelphia, the state of Pennsylvania opened Eastern State Penitentiary, at the time the most expensive building ever constructed in America. That record has since been broken, most recently by buildings with no human beings in them at all, where the computers live. Nobody voted on that, it just happened. The theory behind it was, by the standards of the day, genuinely humane. Reformers, many of them Quakers, looked at the era's prisons, filthy shared pens holding men, women, and children together, and proposed something radical. Give every prisoner a private cell. Clean, heated, with food and a Bible. And total unbroken silence. Alone with his conscience, the thinking went, a criminal would inevitably turn inward, reflect, and emerge penitent. That theory is still sitting inside the word penitentiary. It is, you may notice, the same theory behind sending a child to their room. Except the room costs the taxpayers more than any building in the country, and the child never, ever gets to come back downstairs. Cell blocks radiated from a central hub like spokes, so a handful of guards could surveil every corridor, an architecture of total observation that would not be attempted again at this scale until they figured out how to make us carry the surveillance ourselves, in our pockets, and pay for it monthly. In installments. Each cell had a single narrow skylight the prisoners called the Eye of God. And when a prisoner was moved through the building, guards placed a hood over his head so that he would never see another human face, never socially exist at all. Some men spent years inside without once being seen by another prisoner. The world was dazzled. Europe sent delegations and copied the design on 4 continents. And then, in 1842, Charles Dickens visited. He toured the cells, interviewed the men, and left horrified, writing that this slow, daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain was immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. Reports of prisoners losing their minds accumulated for decades, and by 1913, Eastern State abandoned strict solitary. Not because the building failed, because it worked exactly as designed, and the design was wrong. The machine built to manufacture reflection manufactured madness instead. And here's the uncomfortable part. The idea didn't die. It went dormant for most of a century and came back in concrete and steel as the modern supermax. The hood is gone. The arithmetic is identical. One person, one sealed room, 23 hours a day. Which means the question this video is asking has been running for nearly 200 years. The idealists never solved the problem of what isolation does to a mind. The prisoners had to solve it themselves. And they did, in stages. Clear, consistent stages appearing again and again in the accounts of survivors who never met. Let's go through them. The first stage sounds almost insultingly simple. They built a schedule. Not a loose routine. A rigid, minute-by-minute, self-imposed timetable, enforced by absolutely no one, followed like scripture. Albert Woodfox, who spent more than 4 decades in solitary in Louisiana, the longest such confinement in American history, described waking at the same hour every day, cleaning his cell, exercising, reading, studying law, writing, each activity in its slot, for decades. A Hungarian physician named Edith Bone, held alone for 7 years by a Stalinist secret police that wanted her broken, ran her days like a university, where she was both the faculty and the entire student body. And this pattern repeats in virtually every account of successful survival, across countries, across centuries. It is, beat for beat, the same morning routine influencers now film in soft lighting and sell for $500. Discipline, cold exposure, journaling. These men had the entire masterclass in 1972. The only difference is that nobody in solitary ever said, "link in bio." The reason it works is that solitary's first weapon is formlessness. In a cell where nothing happens, time stops behaving. Days dissolve into each other. And when time dissolves, the self starts dissolving with it, because your sense of who you are is a story arranged in time. The schedule puts the time back. It converts one infinite, shapeless smear of existence into small, finishable units. You are no longer a person buried under an ocean of undifferentiated hours. You are a person with tasks who is currently between them. The schedule was not a habit. It was a load-bearing wall. Underneath the schedule ran a quieter project, keeping the calendar alive. In cells with no clock, no window, and lighting controlled from somewhere else, prisoners counted everything: Meals, guard shifts, the sound of distant doors, the angle of the one blade of light that crossed the floor. They scratched tallies behind bunks. They assigned each day of the week its own texture. Tuesday was law study. Sunday was letters composed in the head to people who might never read them. Because the survivors understood something the rest of us handed over to a lock screen that we now check 200 times a day, like it owes us money. You do not lose your mind all at once. You lose Tuesday first. Then the difference between 1 week and the next, then the month, then the year. And by the time the days have fully dissolved, so has the person they belong to. Holding the calendar was holding the self. In solitary, knowing what day it was counted as an act of resistance. The second stage was the body. And this is the one that surprises people because we think of solitary as a purely mental ordeal. The survivors did not. A standard American solitary cell measures about 6 feet by 9, smaller than a parking space. Meanwhile, in 2026, that exact same square footage in Brooklyn is a charming micro studio. $2,200 a month, utilities not included. The prisoners at least got the utilities. Men ran marathons in there, not metaphorically. Survivors describe pacing patterns: 3 steps, pivot, 3 steps, pivot, sustained for hours, distance tracked in their heads, until the route wore a visible path into the concrete. Nelson Mandela, across 27 years of imprisonment, kept a regimen that would embarrass most free people, running in place for 45 minutes, hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups, in his cell into his 60s. Meanwhile, we count the walk from the couch to the refrigerator as steps. And we feel good about it. Our watch congratulates us. The logic is brutally practical. Exercise is one of the only levers over brain chemistry a prisoner still controls. It burns off stress hormones, and it generates real fatigue. And real fatigue buys real sleep, the difference between a bad day and a hallucinating one. But there is a second layer. In a system engineered to convert you into an object, stored, fed, counted, and moved, physical training is daily proof that you still command something. The state owned the room. It did not own the push-up. And sleep itself deserves a mention, because solitary attacks that too. Many isolation units keep the lights on 24 hours a day, and a brain with no darkness fragments its sleep into shallow, drifting pieces, which accelerates everything else going wrong. The survivors fought back with the only tools in the room. They exercised to exhaustion on purpose. They anchored sleep to the same point in the routine and improvised darkness: a sock, a strip of cloth, an arm laid across the eyes in a practiced position. Which means the sleep protocol currently being sold to you by a podcast host in between supplement ads was field-tested 50 years ago for free by men in concrete boxes. The prisoners figured out everything except the part where you charge for it. In there, a bedtime was not a bedtime. It was equipment care. The third stage is the one that sounds like myth, except it is documented so many times in memoirs, in interviews, in debriefings, that researchers treat it as a signature of survival. The prisoners built worlds inside their heads, and they built them with obsessive engineering-grade precision. Natan Sharansky, a Soviet dissident who spent 9 years in prison, roughly 400 days of it in punishment cells, played chess in his head. Full games, both sides, opening to endgame, thousands of them, for years. He said afterward that he was never bored in solitary, which may be the strangest sentence a human being has ever produced. Years after his release, Sharansky sat down against world champion Garry Kasparov in a simultaneous exhibition and won. He ran the entire operation on one human brain. Offline, no cloud, no subscription tier, no annual keynote. One man in a Soviet punishment cell, outperforming an industry that currently requires its own power plant to write your emails. Edith Bone, the Hungarian physician, took inventory of the 6 languages she spoke and recited vocabulary for hours. She built an abacus from stale bread pellets to run calculations. She walked, street by street from memory, through every city she had ever visited. The Soviet poet Irina Ratushinskaya, in a labor camp with no reliable paper, scratched her poems into bars of soap with a burnt matchstick, memorized the lines, then washed the evidence away. She carried roughly 250 poems out of prison in the only storage device the guards could not search. And before you file this under exceptional people doing exceptional things, hear what the researchers say. The prisoners who fared best gave the prediction machine something to predict: a chess line, a conjugation, a street corner in a city 1,000 miles away. The brain, starved of a world, will accept a rigorously imagined one. It does not particularly care that the world is fictional. Entire industries found that out about 80 years later and turned it into quarterly earnings. The prisoners weren't crazy. They were early. The cell stayed 6 feet by 9. The mind commuted. But no one, and this is the part the lone wolf fantasy gets wrong, no one survived entirely alone. Which brings us to the most remarkable invention in the history of isolation: the wall telephone. In North Vietnamese prison camps in the 1960s, American prisoners of war, held in separate cells and forbidden to communicate under threat of torture, needed a way to reach each other through masonry. One of them, an Air Force pilot named Smitty Harris, remembered an old scheme for sending messages by knocks, mentioned once in passing by an instructor, and carried it into captivity in his head. The system was a 5x5 grid of the alphabet. 2 bursts of taps located each letter, first the row, then the column. Slow at first, like typing with one frozen finger. Within months, men were tapping through stone at conversational speed, passing jokes, chess moves, prayers, and the names of new arrivals, so that every man in the building knew who was there and who was hurting. It was, structurally, a group chat. No read receipts, no ads, nobody's uncle forwarding conspiracy theories at 2 in the morning. And not one member ever left. 100% retention. There are companies in California that would burn a city down for those numbers. The code leaked into everything. Prisoners tapped while sweeping, coughed and sneezed in rhythm, flashed the grid in hand signals across courtyards. Men spent years as close friends, knew each other's families, hometowns, and fears without once seeing each other's faces. And every night, up and down the cell blocks, the same sign-off traveled through the walls. 2 letters, then 3. GNGBU. Good night, God bless you. Survivors of that camp system said afterward with striking consistency that the tap code was not a convenience. It was the thing that kept them alive and sane. A wall is a fact. What the wall means is negotiable. The builders intended it as a barrier. The prisoners repurposed it, without permission, into a telephone. And where there were no neighbors to tap to, the survivors found other company. And this is where the record becomes genuinely strange. The history of solitary confinement is full of animals. Prisoners taming mice with saved crumbs, training them to arrive at a particular hour. And the hour mattered, because an appointment is a future, and a future is precisely what the room was built to remove. Men befriending spiders in the corner of a cell and defending them from guards with real anger. Robert Stroud, the famous birdman, built an entire scientific career out of a canary that fluttered into the yard at Leavenworth, becoming a published authority on bird disease from inside a cell. Psychiatrists who study isolation insist this is not eccentricity. It is a precise solution to a precise problem. A creature that moves on its own schedule is a piece of the world that is not you, and it gives the prediction machine honest work again. Something to watch, something to feed, something that arrives, and might not. Which is the exact emotional mechanism of every notification you have ever waited for. Except the mouse is real. The mouse shows up. And in the entire documented history of solitary confinement, not one mouse has ever tried to sell a man a mattress. The mind will find a face anywhere it can. In solitary, that is not madness. That is medicine. Here is what all of this adds up to, and it is genuinely worth sitting with for a moment. The schedule, the calendar, the push-ups, the defended sleep, the mental chess, the tap code, the mouse, all of it rested on one foundation. And the researchers who study survivors keep finding it underneath everything else. A reason. The survivors, almost universally, had reframed the situation so that their own sanity was the battlefield. Sharansky treated every interrogation as a game he could win, and every day of mental clarity as a defeat inflicted on the apparatus holding him. Woodfox described a single decision, that his cell would be a university and not a coffin, and he taught himself law, taught other men to read through the bars, and filed appeals for prisoners he had never seen. Edith Bone treated her captors, in her own words, with the amused patience of a scientist observing a failed experiment. 7 years they held that woman, and she graded them. That is either the most dignified sentence in the history of imprisonment or the most devastating insult ever delivered politely, and I genuinely cannot tell which. A psychiatrist who survived the Nazi camps built an entire school of therapy on the same observation. The prisoners who endured were rarely the strongest bodies. They were the ones with somewhere to aim, a person to return to, a book to finish, a wrong to outlive. Human beings, it turns out, can absorb almost unlimited hardship when the hardship means something, and are destroyed remarkably fast by suffering that means nothing. Solitary confinement is engineered meaninglessness. An empty room, an indifferent system, a clock with no hands. The survivors manufactured meaning with the same discipline they applied to push-ups. Because in that room, despair was not an emotion. It was the opponent. Let's zoom out one final time because there is a modern study that puts this entire story in a very uncomfortable light. In 2014, researchers at the University of Virginia asked ordinary people to do something trivially easy. Sit alone in a plain room for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, nothing to do. Most people hated it. So the researchers added an option, a button that delivered a painful electric shock. 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women chose to electrocute themselves rather than sit quietly with their own minds for 1/4 of an hour. Grown men sat in an empty room for about 6 minutes and said, "You know what? Shock me, because I am not about to sit here and think about my life." And that was 2014. That was before the phones got good at their job. They have not rerun that study since. I don't think they want to see the number. 15 minutes. The people in this video did 15 years, with none of the tools we call survival equipment. The timetable followed like scripture in a room where no clock existed. The pacing route worn into concrete, 3 steps and a pivot, adding up to marathons. The chessboard that existed nowhere except behind a man's closed eyes, sharp enough decades later to beat a world champion. The abacus made of bread, the poems carried out of a labor camp in the one container the guards could not search. The alphabet tapped through stone, and that 2-letter, 3-letter benediction, "Good night, God bless you." Traveling down a corridor of men who never saw each other, spelling out every single night the most important sentence in the language: "You are not alone." Solitary confinement was designed as a subtraction. Take away the world, and the person should follow. The survivors proved the arithmetic wrong. Because a schedule can be built from nothing. A gymnasium fits in 6 feet by 9, a city can be walked from memory, and a wall, given enough patience, can be taught to speak. The empty room was never actually empty. It had a mind in it. And a mind, it turns out, is the one thing in the cell that the cell cannot hold.